So many of you that follow me might know, or if you have not followed me and you're just finding me, you may not know this. But my first book that I wrote was Leaf Lessons: When Religion and Trauma Collide, the Process of Spiritual Awakening and Healing. In this book, I share about the story of deconstructing from Christianity and my spiritual awakening, and how um, in a sudden moment in my backyard, everything shifted and changed for me. If you have not read my story, or if you're in the middle of reading it right now, I'll just give you a little background about me and how I got to where I am now. So, growing up, I did not grow up in a spiritual home. I did not grow up in a religious home. I did not grow up going to church. And which is super interesting that I ended up in the church around 15, 16 years old, and how that began to kind of form the reality that I saw the world. Before I started going to church as a teenager, I had been in the church a couple times, like Easter or events like Christmas, things like that. Our family would go and celebrate these certain holidays that you're supposed to go to church for. And the interesting thing is I do have memories as a very young girl being in a Baptist Sunday school and dressing up on Easter and going and sitting with all the kids and having this thought of, this doesn't really make much sense to me. And in the middle of all that, I was very spiritual. That's really the only way that I can describe myself before I got into religion. I came into the world very open to the spiritual realm. At a very young age, I could see spirits. I had a spirit that was in my room, and this spirit would hang out every single night, and it would stand in the corner of my room. It was over by my closet. So I was in my room, like if you were to walk into my room, and then my bed was along this wall, and then over here was my bedroom, and then I had a dresser along this wall and a window behind me, my bed. And the being would always stand over in the corner, and once in a while it would move around my room, and sometimes it would be hovering over me. And I always would watch this being. He just watched me. It was this very tall, odd looking spirit. And I would say it actually looked alien like. It had a very large head, had very long arms, it had long fingers, it was very tall. And I wasn't necessarily scared of it, but I knew that it was there. I would pay attention to it. And I remember at one point, I can't remember how old I was exactly, but my grandmother gave me a nightlight. And this nightlight was of like a little, like a Mary from the Bible. And I remember the nightlight having to have that on at night to protect me. For some odd reason, I thought that that was going to help me. And why this nightlight was on, I would get up in the middle of the night to move it around. I don't know how I knew how to do this, but I would move it to see if I was making up that it was a shadow. And it's mostly because when I would tell my parents that I was seeing something in my room, they would tell me, oh, that's just a shadow. You're just seeing a shadow based off something that's shining in your room. It's not really a being. Well, the being would still be there even when I would move things around or try to get the shadow to, go away through the light. And there was a one night I remember thinking, well, if my parents don't believe me, if my family doesn't believe me, then maybe my little brother would. And he was probably 2. He's 2 years younger than me, and I was probably about 4 or 5 when this happened. And I invited my brother to come into my room one night when I was going to bed and to sleep with me. And I asked him, can you see that being in the corner of my room? And he said, yeah, I see it also. And still today, in our late 40s, we both will confirm we both saw that being. Another thing that happened in my early childhood was I would often have angels come and visit me. And the memories that I have about this is they would put a ladder up to my window and they would come and get me and they would take me out of my window and we would go somewhere. I don't know where we went, but I would be visited by these angelic beings that would come and like check in on me or come and take me places once in a while. The other thing I also remember as a very young age, and this is all before the age of five or six, is I had cut my leg. It was on my left leg. And I remember, I don't know if I did something like I was playing with a razor or something. I'm not sure how I cut my leg, but I remember taking a bath one night and seeing this cut on my leg. And it wasn't like a big cut, it wasn't significant, but I remember thinking, I can heal this. And I sat in the bathtub and I put my hand over this cut and I started to tell the cut to heal. And I started to ask God, God heal this. This is healed. God heal this. And I am not sure how long this took, but I remember sitting in the bathtub, looking at this cut on my leg, putting my hand over it, asking God to heal it, believing it was going to be healed. And I literally watched it disappear off of my leg. And as I continue to have these really unique experiences as a child, it got me very curious about the spiritual world. And of course, when you get older, around 6, 7, 8, you really shift out of a state of being able to communicate with spirits, see spirits, all that extra sensory abilities that we have. And we move into the ego state around 7 to 8 years old. And when I started to move into the ego state, I didn't necessarily lose my abilities to connect with spirits, but the abilities began to dim a little bit. And I remember around that time, my parents had divorced when I was 5, and my dad had remarried and moved in with someone else, and my mom was remarrying and moving into a new home. And when we moved into the new home, I remember like looking for the spirit that was in my last home in that new home. And I remember at night sitting up and looking at my closet, thinking maybe it will be on my closet in this room too, or maybe it will be in a corner of this room. And I never saw it again after that. And so the curiosity of spiritual things was in me from a very young age. And I think it was around 11 or 12 I received a cross necklace from someone. Someone gave me this necklace, I think for Christmas or my birthday, I'm not sure. And I wore that thing all the time. Like it was super special to me for some reason. And I remember I broke the cross off of the chain of the necklace one day, and this fear came over me that I had done something wrong. So I remember I took like um, I don't know, like the thing you wrap around your bread. And I took the wire and I wired the cross back onto the chain and I hung it on my dresser. And I would lay on my bed and look at the cross and wonder, what is that really about? And so I was super curious at a very young age about all these experiences I was having. Another thing that was going on around the same time that I was not aware of until recently was that my mom and my dad both had a UFO experience before I was born. Around the time I was about my mom says she was pregnant with me, about 8 months pregnant with me when this happened. A UFO appeared to my mom and dad, and it hovered over them for quite a while before it disappeared. And then I have recently, later in life, found out that this same UFO appeared to my mom again when I was around 7 or 8 years old. And she has shared with me that she was always fearful that the aliens were coming to get her daughter. And it's interesting that she was worried about it coming to get me and not my brother. And later in my teens, I ended up seeing this UFO myself. It would show up in around my yard. We lived out in the country. We had a lot of land, and I would stay outside until dark and look at the stars. I was always drawn to the stars. And as I was looking at the stars one night, I began to see this unique light in the sky, and the light would follow me around. And it was there for several nights. I think it was actually a couple months that I would see it, like throughout a whole summer one time. And I remember telling my parents that there was something following me around outside. And of course, they did not believe me. And I'm sure now I understand, like, my mother was actually probably fearful that these beings were coming to get me or abduct me or whatever it was. And so it was kind of a taboo topic not to talk about these things. So I really started to shut down my, interest in some of these things. And when I got invited to church at age 16, I went into this building for some youth thing and automatically felt like, maybe this is it. Maybe this is what I've been looking for the whole time. And very quickly got involved in the church. I was in an abusive home. My stepdad was very abusive to me. And so finding anything in my world that brought me comfort was welcomed. And the church brought me comfort at that time. And so I started going to church. And the interesting thing is that my family did not go with me. Because I was a teenager, because I could drive at that time, I would go by myself. And I think it's interesting to look back at this now, knowing that my family wasn't really in, support of me going to church. I would actually sneak to church sometimes if there was an event or if there was a youth group or something like that. Like, I would actually tell my family I was going to go to a party and go to church instead. And so spirituality, religion, God, everything was a huge part of my life growing up. And I really became indoctrined into the biblical understanding of religion. And over time, I really started to be programmed that all the spiritual experiences that I was having were demonic, or they were evil, or there was something wrong with me because I was seeing things or hearing things or experiencing things. And the thing is like, these experiences, such as the being that was in my room, didn't just stop because I went to church. It didn't stop because I accepted Jesus. In some ways it increased because I started to have visions. I started having dreams. I started to see things before they would happen. And I wasn't really ever sure what was going on with me, and no one around me could explain it outside of the religious perspective of, you need Jesus, you need deliverance, you need to repent, you're a sinner, these are demonic things that you are experiencing. And so I really started to write this identity about myself, that I was evil, that I was bad, that there was something wrong with me, and holding on to a lot of shame about myself around my spiritual connection. Over time, I ended up going to a Christian college. I got a degree in Bible. I wanted to serve humanity. I knew I had a calling on my life to help humans in some way, to know who they were, to know God, to find freedom of some type in their life. And because of being so indoctrined into the religion, I really thought that it was going to be through like a church setting that I would be sharing and teaching things. And so I was very dedicated to studying. I read the Bible every single day. I prayed every single day. I would write a letter to God every single day. Everything in my life was about my connection with God. And those who knew me at the time would also know that. It doesn't mean I was perfect. It doesn't mean that I didn't do things that were what were considered to be sin. But my life was really focused on being a servant to God. And so when I started to have my spiritual awakening, I believe that there were many times throughout my life that I was having moments of awakening, but I didn't really understand them to be that until I had the most significant awakening in 2016. But in my early 20s, around 2004, 2005, 2006, I was having a lot of spiritual experiences around that time. I had been traveling all over the world. I'd been to India, I'd been to Laos, I'd been to Thailand, I'd been to Japan, I'd been to all these different places around the world. I had went and lived in Chicago. I'd went and lived in Los Angeles. I had been working on serving God through my life and giving God my life so that I could be basically a disciple of Christ. And in the middle of this, I was still seeing spirits. I was still hearing things. I was still seeing things. I was having very crazy out of body experiences. I was having visions and dreams. And if you have read my book, Leaf Lessons, you know about the vision I had about a leaf. And the leaf vision transformed my life. And I will never forget having that vision because it was so real. It was my first out of body experience that I had. And that moment kind of propelled me forward into having other spiritual experiences where I had another experience where I felt what the only way I can describe this is as if lightning had like came down through the crown of my head and went through my entire body, and I fell to the ground. And it actually did scare me a little bit because I wasn't sure what had happened to me. And the vibration of this experience was so intense. It felt like there was something new about me the moment right before it happened and the moment right after. It was like something shifted and switched in me. And I believe that throughout all these things I was experiencing, like my spirit team, my higher self, maybe even the extraterrestrials that I work with now were attempting to help wake me up and get me on alignment to share what I'm here to share with humanity. And when I started to have this urge in around 2014 to study the Bible and to study end times, I became almost like obsessed with this. I started to I remember I bought several different versions of the Bible. I got the amplified. If you don't know much about Bibles, there's like a whole bunch of different versions and they all have a different way of like saying the same thing basically. But there's the Amplified Bible, the New Living Translation. There was even a new Bible that had been released called the Passion Bible that I got, King James Bible, the New King James Bible. Like there's so many different versions of the Bible that I wanted to know. I don't know what propelled me other than I was going through an awakening and didn't know it, that I wanted to know what every single different version said. And I remember I would buy all these different versions and I would lay them out on my bed or on the floor, and I would lay there and I would read a chapter in one and then read it in another one and read it in another one. And I started to see things in the Bible that, based on the version of it, that didn't add up. There were some things that were in King James Bible that were not in New King James Bible. There were things in the New King James Bible that were not in the Amplified Bible. There were things in the Amplified Bible that were not in the New Living Translation Bible. So I started to question, like, why are all these different? And I remember going to church one day, and at this time, I was going to a very charismatic, evangelical, Pentecostal, holy rolling, flag waving, speaking in tongues, laying on hands Bible. Like this was hardcore. Like church service would start at, I would get there at 9:30 and I wouldn't leave till 3:30 sometimes. Like church was an all day thing for me. And I just thought that's just the way it was supposed to be. And so when I would go to church, I remember going to my pastor one day and asking questions about why are these all different? And he didn't have an answer for me. And I thought it was really interesting. And I would even ask, like, what does it mean for this and this Bible, and what does it mean in this, and how do these relate? And like, I was just asking really deep questions, and nobody could answer my questions. And I remember I started having dreams and visions, and I would go to church and I would ask, like, what does this dream mean? What is this vision? What is this, trying to tell me? And I didn't get any answers. And so I started to get really confused on my beliefs. And I remember like spending a lot of time in prayer. On days I didn't have to work, I would get up and I would sit in my living room in silence, and I would, for probably a good 2 hours sometimes, just sit in the energy of God. And it makes me a little emotional because I remember this feeling of like, I felt God. Like, I really felt this energy, and I knew I was connecting to something bigger than me, but I didn't have any way to describe it. I didn't have any way to share that with people. And it didn't make sense based on the things I knew in the church. And so it was just confusing me even more to have these really intense experiences. And I really didn't even tell anybody that I was doing this. And so I just started to really go inward and start to contemplate, like, what is it? What is the truth? What do I believe? How does this all add up? Nobody around me could help me. And so I didn't know what to do other than just to pray and to ask God to reveal himself to me in whatever way that was. And in 2016, I was in my backyard mowing. It was the summer. I think it was like June or July. I cannot remember. Um, and I remember mowing my yard. I push mow it. I have a pretty big yard. I was push mowing, and I was walking towards my house. And as I was walking towards my house, to the right of me, I suddenly heard a voice that said, "You're doing it wrong. Stop walking in condemnation." And I remember thinking, what does that mean? And I was a little shocked that I heard this voice because it was very audible. And I remember thinking, is there somebody in my yard? So I stopped my mower and I looked around to see, is there somebody here talking to me? And there was nobody there. And I was like, okay, that was weird. So I start my mower again and I start pushing, and I hear it again. You're doing it wrong. Stop walking in condemnation. And at that point, I remember, full stop. And I had this moment where my entire life felt like a dream. That's the only way I can describe it. It was almost like reality in a second shifted, and everything looked different around me. Everything about my life felt off. I felt like I was living in a box, and the box had just blown apart. And all of a sudden, I saw beyond the truth of what I had been living in my life. And I saw beyond the constructs, the ideas that I have formed my reality in through religion, through my work, through my family, through my friends, through choices I was making. Like, it was almost like a near death experience where my entire life flashed before my eyes in just seconds. And it rattled me so much that it was like I lost my breath for a second. And I remember thinking, if this is wrong, then what is right? And I started to, just because I was very, very, very religious and Christian at the time, I know that my spirit team had to get to me through religious things. I started to have these songs, these Christian songs going through my head. And there's an old Christian song, and I can't remember who sings this song, but there was a couple verses in this song that said, "Walk in liberty and walk in freedom." And that verse came in my head, and I started to hear that song in my head, and I started to have this realization, I don't even know what that means. Here I am singing about freedom and liberty, And here I am hearing this voice saying, you're doing it wrong. Don't walk in condemnation. And I'm studying the Bible and I'm reading all this stuff and I'm studying end times like crazy. And so I just like everything collapsed around me at once. And it felt like there was not that I couldn't do anything to stop this, but there was no way I could describe this to anybody. And all of a sudden I started to have this feeling of I have to change everything. I cannot do this anymore. I am not meant to be in this tiny little place, in this tiny little job, in this tiny little church, in this that there's more to this experience of life than just this. I can't do this anymore. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't keep living my life the way I was. And I really didn't even know I was having a spiritual awakening at the time either. It was so intense that there were no way to describe what was happening to me. But I do know that I suddenly started to have this urge to change everything. I wanted to get a new job. I wanted to quit my job and get a new job. I was working in the mental health field. I've been working in the mental health field since I started working. I had been going to this church for at least 12 to 13 years. I had these friends, I had these experiences. I had everything in my life was about my faith. I did not listen to anything but Christian music. I didn't watch certain movies. I didn't everything was very bridled. Everything was in this fear of sinning kind of thing. And when I started to step forward in these changes, and this happened probably within this 6 months after this moment that I had in my backyard, I started to have this urge to uproot everything. And I didn't move. I didn't just change overnight. I did, a lot of people go through a spiritual awakening and they just start doing things right away. I gradually started to shift and change things. The very first thing that I did was I got in my car. I remember I had a Toyota Corolla. I love that car. And I got in my car, and the only station I ever listened to was Christian. And I remember thinking, man, I used to really like 70s music. I love Fleetwood Mac. I love Pink Floyd. I love like all this old rock music. Like I'm kind of a hippie at heart. And I thought, man, I kind of want to listen to that. And I remember changing the station on my radio and feeling an actual physical reaction of fear coming up in me that I was disobeying God and that I was going to do something wrong. And I pushed through it though. And I started slowly kind of finding myself again. I ended up quitting my job. I got a new job. And this is a whole nother story. I won't go all into all of this, but I did quit my job. I got a new job. Told by church that I wasn't going to be going to church anymore. I actually got up in front of my church and told them I'm being called to leave. And of course they didn't understand. But I wanted to do everything right. I wanted to be respectful to everybody and everything around me that had been a part of this identity that I was. And slowly I started to shift out of all these things that I had known to be true about myself. And I wasn't really sure how to navigate this. And so I did find myself going to like a different church. And I only went to that other church for probably another year before I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is not aligned for me. It doesn't make sense to me anymore. This doesn't feel real. It doesn't make sense. Like none of this it just can't be right. That there's this judging God that punishes us for sin that he created us to have. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. And so I started to really try to figure out what is real for me. And the only thing, because I had been spending so much time in prayer, I didn't even know about meditation, to be honest. because I had been in prayer so much, I just started to do that again. But in this, I just started meditating. I don't know how I knew. I just started to meditate every single day and spend hours of meditation trying to figure out what was real. And that's when I started realizing that I had gifts, that these beings or these shadows or these energies or these voices or these things I was experiencing were not demonic. They were my gifts. I started realizing that I had always had them and that they had been programmed out of me, or I had been taught to fear them. And so as I gradually shifted out of the fear and into trusting myself and my gifts, I had to work really hard to n- not allow fear to overtake me when I was opening up to these things. And so over time, of course, I am where I am now. I channel, I do psychic medium work, I do intuitive healing work with people. I'm an energy healer. I have clients all over the world that I've worked with, and my whole life looks like literally completely different the way than it did 10 years ago. And in that time, I lost my dad to cancer. My dad is one of my spirit guides now. I have, this completely different view of reality and humanity and death and spirits and their and fear and programming. Everything has changed for me, and it has been a hard journey, but a liberating and freeing journey, just like that song that popped into my head in 2016 of live in freedom, live in liberty. That is what I have found by stepping out of religion and stepping back into my truth, into connecting to my higher self, to the voices that I've had, to the spirits that I've seen. And I'm sharing this with you today because I've kind of taken a few weeks to step back from myself, from everything around me, because I am going through another spiritual awakening. And I don't think I anticipated that this would happen. I didn't anticipate that there would be another wave of awakening that came upon me at some point. And this is a really hard thing to navigate. And I'm sharing and I'm being vulnerable with you. If you've made it this far in the video, I'm sharing to be vulnerable with you about this because I want to be transparent of what it really feels like to be going through an awakening and how hard it is. And I'm currently feeling this shift in my reality. And it's the same feeling that I had in 2016 of me looking at my life, looking at reality, looking at humanity, looking at spirit, looking at everything going on in the world. If you didn't know, is kind of crazy right now with Epstein files and with this stuff with Trump. Like there's so much going on. And I am sitting with this because I I want to show up in the highest integrity as a spiritual teacher and as someone that is showing up as somebody that helps guide other people through their awakening. I did not have anybody to help me through my awakening. And so for me, my passion, my drive is to support people in theirs and to understand these different shifts that do take place. And if you've had a real true spiritual awakening, you know that it is not an easy process. There is, they call it the dark night of the soul, but our soul isn't dark. It's the ego, is the reality in which we live in here on earth that has the darkness. And even in that darkness, the darkness is not the same as what our human perception makes it. Darkness is not an absence of life. Darkness is not the absence of love. It's just a different frequency that we have lived in, that we have known ourselves to be, and we've known the world to be. And so when you shift into new frequency, into new awakening, into new awareness, the reality in which you know yourself and the world around you completely shifts. And I've been on this journey for the last 10 years, and here I am going through another awakening. And I don't know where this awakening will lead me. I don't know what it's going to teach me. I don't know where it's going to guide me. I don't know what to expect. And here's what I want to share is I don't have to. This is not something that you can figure out with your ego and your logic. This is something you sit with and you don't rush through. So if you feel yourself going through what I'm going through right now, my encouragement is to love yourself, is to not force yourself to show up, to not force yourself through this, to not try to condemn the ego or to criticize yourself or to push away the pain of it, but also not allow that darkness or the energy that's coming up in you to define you either. And so as you go through these different shifts in your awareness, and as we continue to ascend as humanity, this is something that will likely happen to you. And I'm here to help guide the way because I'm going through it. I'm going through it too, or first, or whatever is happening to me at this time. And I am going to be completely transparent with you as I go through this shift that I'm going through. And I'm open to questions. I'm open to guidance. If you've gone through this, I'm open to helping you to understand that you're really okay. And I understand. And this is an unexpected journey of moving into the fourth dimension. A lot of people are going to call this fifth dimension and new earth, but I'm going to kind of step away from that idea, at least until spirit completely reveals to me that this is a fifth dimension thinking, because the reality of it is what I have known to be about fifth dimension is a complete 100% shift in the conscious reality. And I I might be going through that right now, but I also know that I have to go through layers of shedding to get there. And living in a fifth dimension is going to require that I have completely let go of the ego in the way that it performs in this frequency. And that doesn't mean that I criticize my ego or I don't love my ego. That means that the ego starts to take a different role in my humanity. And that role is to support me in my humanness, in my physicalness, and for me to be guided by the truth of my higher self and the love that created me. So yeah, this is me, and where I am, and it's why I haven't made a video in 2 weeks. Um, and I can't tell you that there's going to be any consistency in this journey, but my goal is to be transparent and to walk this out and to be present and being real with you the whole time I go through it. So, yeah, I am there with you guys if you're going through it. So, until we meet again, I wish you the best day, night, evening, whatever time it is for you. I send you all the universal love. Namaste.